Thank you very much for the introduction. Welcome everyone to this discussion on the Republica stage. Good morning. Well, that's a nerd joke. Today I have the honor to facilitate the discussion about lies and hate speech in the EU. One word about me. I'm in the board of an organization, Reporters Without Borders. So we have my organization has been critical about this topic, but today I'm here to facilitate, so I'm able to see this critically from both perspectives, and I will ask critical questions, but obviously I'm not here to talk about my own opinion, but I'm the facilitator. The discussion is organized by the Informational Bureau of the European Parliament in Germany. Today with me is Rebecca Harms, member of the European Parliament and Shadow Rapporteur of the European Union for Strategic Communications Against Hate Speech Against the EU, and Ulrich Kelber, member of the German Parliament. Today is about two different
It's about the law in Germany to enforce hate speech legislation on the internet that's going to be about to come into force in Germany, and two issues, which is hate crime and fake news, which of course is thin ice already. I could have said that using the English words in German, which have become buzzwords, but the law that we are debating about is against criminal fake news and criminal hate speech on the internet. And what that exactly means, we will talk about in about a minute. And I will try to keep these things separate because it's not easy with these terms, hate speech and fake news, to actually refer to what we are talking about. Okay, so let's go into details. And Mrs. Harms, I would like to know from you which initiative we are actually talking about, because we are going to focus an EU initiative against fake news at first, but also criminal hate speech that mostly in social networks, but all over the internet can be found. Now, what is your idea? What do you want to do? Well, if I understood the invitation correctly, then you are interested in an initiative report. It's not a legislation that the Parliament is trying to instigate, but it's a report where the Parliament has dealt with propaganda and possibilities of propaganda and fake news, faked reality, how to deal with that. The most important occasion for this report by the European Parliament, which is named the Fortiga report after the Polish colleague that led this initiative. And this report came into being after a year-long confrontation with organized propaganda of the Kremlin, propaganda that strongly focused on misrepresenting the state of things in Ukraine before and after the Euromaidan protests and the whole phase in which the Crimea Peninsula was occupied and the war in eastern Ukraine. And probably for the German listeners, you have to state it explicitly. I'm a filmmaker myself. When I was a member of the federal state parliament and we got to know each other, I was a long way from this kind of censorship and control that press and journalists are under. But as far as what really made me speechless as a politician was to notice the effect of falsified news regarding Ukraine. I work in Ukraine. I have been doing this since 1988, and most of the things that I did were of no interest to Germans, dissidents in Ukraine existing, who knew of that, and the way the country developed, where it actually is. You have the Chernobyl anniversary, you have the Orange Revolution, Timoshenko behind bars, and then Euromaidan and the war. That's kind of the things that Germany is interested in, or Germans. And that applies more or less throughout Western Europe. In Eastern Europe, things are different. People know the country better there. But this relative uninformedness in our society, into that came systematic propaganda financed by the Russian state, transported not just via Raptly or Sputnik, but also social media, a lot through social media. This troll factory in St. Petersburg is famous by now, but initially it wasn't known. And what we found as politicians that worked in Eastern Europe, which is our own neighborhood, what we found was that these falsified news actually have an effect that the Kremlin intends it to have, which is insecurity and inability to judge reality. That was the result of propaganda. And propaganda always went very strongly with falsified news. And if you want to summarize it, something that's going on until today, something I had every week since the Euromaidan and in Kiev. Whenever I came back, I was suddenly confronted with even friends asking me, why do you actually support this extreme right-wing uprising in Kiev? The more aggressive the mood became, the stronger this insecurity became. And when there was an occupation and war in autumn of 2014, and I, for the first time, visited some people in, I don't know where, they actually told me that when the Ukrainian army liberated us, we thought that the fascists were about to come, and we hid away. So to deal with these challenges from organized propaganda, that is what the European Parliament demanded of the European Commission, and particularly the Foreign Representative. And there is an external action service now in our foreign policy service where 11 people overall work. And 2 of these work on strategic communication, 2 on finding falsified news, and also deal with how to raise awareness of falsification in the media.
So I have another question before we go on to you. So in the announcement there was something about the voluntary.
Sondern europäisch. Und ich denke, da kommen wir ja zum Kern der ganzen Sache. Was stellen Sie sich denn da vor? Was kann und sollte denn da passieren?
So what do you think about this voluntary self-regulation? Is it working? What do you think about it? Well, I would recommend that every one of you should read the Fortiga report because it's a bit longer than only 10 tweets. This report is about that we are of the opinion that we can't respond to propaganda with propaganda. The report has many points about strengthening journalism and independent journalism, so that journalist work can do more about it, and it's more about media pedagogic, and it's about questions which are asked today in Germany. If it's relevant for the law, how can you fight that? What are the right responses? It's also a big topic in the net community, the online community. And it only started. It's about the question whether the European Union should reconsider and
ob wir da mehr machen können, als wir heute mit den Millionen, die wir an Euronews geben, ist ja nun wahrhaft kein öffentlich-rechtliches Medium, ob wir damit was anderes machen können. Und dann geht es ganz stark um eine Frage, die auch Heike Maas beschäftigt.
And mainly it's about one question, which is also where also Heiko Maas is concerned about. If huge social media like Facebook, which are enormous also financially, if they do something like news, they are saying themselves that they have a news feed, shouldn't they oblige to the same laws as press? The problem for the European Union is that the legislation about press is not only our concern, but it's mainly decided on the national levels. I'm of the opinion that if you say, I'm doing news and I have a news feed, they should be under the same laws and under the same legislation as news media. Jetzt höre ich gar nichts mehr.
Die Bundesregierung ist ja jetzt sozusagen einen Schritt weiter als die Kommission.
So the German Parliament is one step further than the European Parliament. It's not, you're not only thinking about having a law, but you already have the first draft for a law. So this law is talking about what social medias exactly are. So there's a definition, so you know what you're talking about, and it has defined what what criminal relevant fake news are and how they should be handled. Can you please explain how you came to this first draft? So, yeah, it's very important that this is about criminal hate crime. That's only a part of the big social phenomena of fake news, where a lot of more aspects are dealt with, like counter-speech. So we are focusing on the criminal offenses, and where a criminal intent is obvious. So it's not about satire, like when the Postillon talked about left extremist or something like that. But example is there was a fake report about rape, which was intended to spark hate against a specific group of people. So we are not introducing a new law to delete this kind of news.
If I, as an operator, become aware of criminal content on my platform and don't remove it, then I become liable according to a certain law. But what we are doing here is to tell providers, operators, that they have to report and you have to have a useful kind of, you have to have a usable user management. Users have to be able to report illegal content, and you have to be able to prove that you have a procedure like this in place, and to make sure that we don't keep getting news that your team from Ireland or the USA. We need, for this reporting, we need to have a person in the country that we can contact from the platform, not someone not having to refer to Ireland or the US. And if those conditions are not met, then there is the possibility to fine the operators. So we sanction if operators are not fulfilling the obligations they currently have. That is the core issue that we want. And with the definition, we even make sure that some of those that according to this notice and take down principle would be affected are not affected by it. The law is about what we would consider a social platform in the narrower sense, and we have an extra hurdle as well, which is that 2 million users in the domestic users have to be there on the social platform before the obligation with a serious fine will be there. Okay, we are talking about criminal things, and the law is called Network Enforcement Law. This is to ensure that what is criminal right now can actually be enforced, right? You have just said why this might be the case. There might not be a person to contact, and the users that want to react and say that there is some criminal content that have to know who to turn to, and there has to be a way of fining the operator. But the question then is, where is exactly is the problem you want to solve if it's criminal already? The problem is that criminal content keeps getting disseminated at a large scale, thousands or millions of copies even. And as a society and legally, we have the kind of agreement that this is supposed to be criminal. Even in our law, before a fine can be imposed, there is no authority, not a ministry that makes decisions. It's a court that makes that decision, because sometimes there are some wrong rumors about concerning this. We say that it's not acceptable if this happens at a large scale, where there have been surveys for more than a year ago when we were in contacts with operators, with civil society. We started a monitoring process ourselves, a task force with the operators, in which we received assurances. One of those was that complaints from users about criminal content would be handled by German-speaking employees, and they would check it against German law and not Californian community rules, for example, where some things may be forbidden that we find completely normal, but on the other hand, such as Holocaust denial is not considered a problem. So assurances also that we received, and then we monitored those in 2 steps. We had an organization for youth protection, protecting youths from obviously criminal content, identifying and reporting this content. Some of these reports came from private users, and some of these came via the youth protection network that we set up. And then there were people that referred to us saying that they had tried both, and that, again, didn't have a thorough effect. We looked at YouTube, which received quite good parameters, measures such as 90%, and Facebook with just 39% was even worse than before, at 1% at Twitter. Okay, Mrs. Harms Before I come to you, one question to you, Mr. Kelber. You just said it was courts, it should be courts that decide whether something's criminal. That's not how I understood it. So far, I thought that Facebook decides what is getting removed, and a court would only decide whether the removal was correct or not. But what I said was the question whether something had to be, whether a fine is imposed after something is not deleted. That is what the courts decide. What you are alluding to is two issues. Do we privatize the law? And then there is the overblocking issue, which we will come to because it is important. The privatizing of law enforcement is something that we have to look at in other areas as well. I'm a computer scientist, not a legal expert. But there are other legal areas that are relevant here. You have certain responsibilities that you have to follow, not just in the media area, but also privately, where you cannot just say, I'll have to wait until a court decides that I have to act. But certain things you have to do because they obviously, to prevent a crime or to make someone not do a crime, and law for that exists. Germans actually do have to remove content, otherwise they are culpable. And if you become aware of a crime through one of your users, for example, the only thing we say is that if you have the obligation and we notice that you're not acting on it, then we'll have to do something that hurts you. If you systematically refuse, then there is a fine. Ms. Harms, now we have some impression now what the purpose of the law is. We'll come back to the keywords that Mr. Kelber mentioned. But you said yourself that a lot of competence is not there at the EU level. And I would like to talk today about the part where the regulation part. You said that there has to be a lot of media competency, that has to be furthered, and has to be information. We all agree, I'm sure, but the common sense, of course, is one of the most important instruments to recognize hate speech or false news. We'll come to criminality, culpability. But what do you want? What do you want?
This is an important part where you have to separate, make a difference between those two topics. So if the Russian state is financing like a troll factory, which is leading to insecurities between citizens of the European Union, or if the aim is to of this very hugely financed propaganda, which a lot of false news to separate members of the European Union or to organize majorities to work with the Ukraine, then we have to think about how to handle with it. This is a part which is hard to deal with in laws. This is one of the many topics which is in the report debated in the European Parliament. So there is no legislation because it's hard to have regulations and laws there. So we are not a truth ministry, even though some people talk about us like this. But we are trying to counter this with good ideas and European values to find responses to this, and this response needs to be found. And this is what Mr. Kelber is talking about. From the same experience in winter 2013-2014, even before the big debate started in Germany about hate and hate speech against politicians on the internet, I was sitting in front of my Facebook page and my new Twitter page. I only started it in 2013 for the last elections, and I was there sitting with my employees, and we were looking for ways to deal with all this hate speech, and it took us sometimes a week to delete these hate comments, and a lot of the comments were already against the German laws, and I think it's important to find regulations to counter this criminal hate speech. A lot of the calls which are there are already concerning the criminal laws and are already illegal. So yeah, again, the European Union doesn't have the opportunity to pass laws on this topic. We don't have the legal framework to pass laws in the European Parliament. And since we had this agreement, I tried to inform myself more. So it's not only about hate, but it's also about the differences between, for example, in Germany, the freedom of art, also looking at social media, that might be something different in Scandinavia or also in California that might be considered pornography. That's a very difficult thing to have this unified. I'm somewhat relieved that you're not looking at passing laws on this. It's hard to imagine to regulate Russian propaganda by European laws. Yes, I've already said that we shouldn't just yeah, I think we agree on this point. I think we should focus on the legislative process. We are here at a point to look at the behaviors in society. Someone recently told me it's allowed to hate, and it only has its limits if it's concerning criminal activity. And this, as already pointed out, is considered differently in different countries. So, and as you pointed out, in the EU, there is no legislative power on this. No, I didn't say we should pass laws on this, and the report doesn't say this either. The report is saying we shouldn't look at propaganda, but we should strengthen independent journalism, and I think this is very important. When the discourse about the Ukraine was happening, when I was looking at German news, they copied one-to-one the news published on Sputnik and other Russian media. And all the West European correspondences were like not there anymore in Eastern European countries, and this is visible in this specific situations, that it would be better that news about these topics, like the occupation of the Crimea, shouldn't just copied by Russian state media. Russia is not a democracy. They don't have free media. It's propaganda. So for us, it would be better if we had independent journalists there. I would be happy about questions from the audience, but I have two more questions for Herr Kelber. So if you have any questions, there will be two microphones in the audience. Herr Kelber, you already said that there are different critiques about the law which is currently drafted. One is overblocking. There are very high fines announced in this report, which, for example, are targeted against Facebook, which are around 50 million. So they actually consider this. So what is now talked about is that if Facebook wants to avoid this huge fines, Facebook will probably delete more comments than would actually be falling under this criminal laws. So where's this line between the freedom of speech and actual criminal postings? What are you saying about this?
Well, I can understand the worry. This has been debated, and we have experience with social networks with their community standards, even in the framework of their community standards, deleting, removing content where you think the person that manually removed this either didn't understand or the automated systems are getting it wrong. The video of the party that is deleted because some mechanism thinks it's recognizing copyrighted music or things that are recognized as child pornography that are not. So the thing is, you have to withstand hatred and have to tolerate other opinions. So are there limits? We are in an area that is very sensitive in terms of basic rights. And one answer is we don't have overblocking right now. We have underblocking. There is a lot of criminal content that is being spread, and that leads to even stronger reactions. There's a certain reinforcement process happening, and that even leads to actual criminal acts or action taking place as a consequence. And secondly, the networks earn money with these criminal contents, and the fact that there is a debate and dissent and people are drawn towards the networks that earns the money, and this effect will stay. Every removal reduces the opportunities to earn money, and this trend we have to work against. Still, it is correct that we have to observe, after putting such a law in place, how does it continue, and we have to put certain methods in place, not just in the debate about the draft law that we currently have. One example is what you just talked about, this will go through the legal instances for several years. If we are talking about a false statement, that may not be something that is obviously criminal that you can decide within 24 hours or the 7 days deadline that we have. If you cannot do that, you had the obligation, you are not threatened with a fine, but you can imagine what the category of obviously criminal content that you really want to be removed immediately. You don't want to be a state prosecutor to be involved. If there is things like a person's address, which does happen. Now, this, after a report, should be removed immediately, and the fine is about not have you in one post just made a misjudgment, a genuine mistake, and the court might then say, yeah, well, that was... No, it's about refusing the mechanism, the transparency and the processing of these reports and the takedown. That is when operators can be faced with a fine if there is a systematic, consistent refusal, and then there is a sensitive fine. Okay, quick question. You said there is no overblocking, but underblocking, how do you know that? Well, because I've just given you my example where we work together, and our experts that we commissioned to look at this huge amount and find things that are obviously criminal. That was 1%, and found that only 1% or 39% were being removed, where every judge would say, well, clearly that is criminal. But do you have a mechanism with which you can determine that statements that are actually protected by freedom of speech are not being removed, or are not being protected? You have to make sure, you have to know how these people work, how they are educated, and I'm sure that with this compliance mechanism, also has to be said how they respond additionally to prevent this in the future. But these social networks, of course, do not have a must-carry obligation. You cannot demand things like if you cannot demand that certain things do not happen on the network. We cannot enforce that certain content is treated. We are working on Facebook Like as an example right now, where we'll have transparency and where we'll see whether the pendulum will swing too far in the other direction if we do move towards overblocking. But that would be the company castrating itself, as it were, and the fines, of course, would not be coming in on a daily basis. It would be a one-time fine for a consistent refusal. There was a first question there, one in the second row, and one further back. Yes, please. My name is Marion Appel, and I have one question to Mrs. Harms. Ms. Harms, what you said is that critical journalism has to be supported, and the examples you then talked about, to me, sounded like this critical kind of Germany did not exist in Germany, and that is completely out of line with my perception. If I listen to public broadcasters, radio or TV, I do not get the impression that they cannot afford their own correspondents doing independent reporting on the ground. So I cannot understand what you said there. I understand that you are critical towards the Russian troll factories, but I cannot see that there is a gap in Germany of working against that. And another question to Mr. Kelber, what the draft law says, to me, sounds very vague. How do these social networks, how are they supposed to prove how they work, and what are the deadlines? And did the law think about, in the drafting process, were thoughts given to the justice system being overburdened, maybe, or is that just regarded as an issue for the federal states to handle, the other level, and not in their interest? Ms. Harms? Well, I would say that in most countries around us, in Eastern Europe, in our neighborhood, in particular the countries between us and Russia, there is very little correspondent journalism. And at the beginning of the Ukraine war, that was very important. I remember journalists I know that overnight, having worked from Warsaw, having reported on Ukraine from Warsaw, overnight becoming war correspondents, a completely new challenge, and to think that they are overstaffed in this area is completely wrong. I think there is a deficit there, but also I don't think that German reporting is the worst either. What I can observe until today is that the narrative that the Russian propaganda is setting, is trying to set, this one important key narrative, which is that in Kiev there was a right-wing uprising, that is very persistent, and Ukraine being a divided country where Russian-speaking people would be discriminated against or suppressed, that is another thing that is consistently being believed when that is in the area of falsified news. There is simply a large and there's a large entry.
Lack of knowledge.
Sorry?
Lack of knowledge.
There's a lack of knowledge, which also leads to, which opens a door to this falsified news, and that is being forgotten because no one is there that continually reports. I'm not sure if, because I have this focus on Eastern Europe, whether I may be exaggerating this somewhat, but to say that all media can claim they have good staffing in this regard, I would really doubt that. And the other challenge first is the one that stems from this Joel factory thing. The way that social media creates certain rooms in which the kind of debate completely detaches from reality, and users detach into their own separated realities. How to deal with that, I don't know myself either, not yet. But this is something we need to talk about. And I believe that the Republica is a place to talk about how to develop this further. We have this beautiful new world, so to say, which has been hyped to an unbelievable extent, but it comes with a lot of challenges and problems and crimes, criminally culpable things, and society has to deal with this in a new way. And what I believe, although I'm not an expert, my colleague Jan-Philipp Albrecht mostly deals with these things, but there is one thing in which we completely agree. It cannot be that the digital world has no legality, no law. Law has to grow into this sphere. We have the technology first and haven't necessarily thought in advance, but we are now in the process of finding new solutions to new confrontations. Mr. Kelber, yeah, it's very concrete. I think there's an obligation to remove of obviously criminal, a term that is defined in legal practice. So this should be removed within 24 hours, other content within 7 days, and the transparency reporting is to be made once per quarter, I think. And the whole area of fines, there will be supplementary commenting on this, how to handle the whole fining issue. I agree that today our legal system is overburdened with certain issues from the digital realm, and there are many ideas how to work on that. I think also you have to have prosecutors and courts available 24/7 to deal with certain things. But our suggestion leads to courts and prosecutors not being overburdened so much, because we say to the operators, first you have to deal with your own obligations and remove content, and we, with a legal procedure, only check when there is a doubt, a debate, and apparently criminal content is not getting removed, and the courts then have to decide again if such a fine is being refused, or if there's an objection, a legal objection against a fine. So it's not these huge numbers per day, and it's currently only one federal state that is being burdened. We thought that the justice, there's a court in Bonn, which is the state of North Rhine-Westphalia, that is being charged, because that's where the relevant authority is. But the alternative suggestion that we have seen, which is that networks can publish anything and work on anything, and courts and prosecutors have to be upstaffed to work on all these complaints. That I find unrealistic. Okay.
We have another 50 minutes, and to get to many questions as possible, please keep your questions very brief, and also please keep your answers very brief. So another question. I have a question for Mrs. Harms. You were talking about Euronews very briefly, which is about public news media in Europe. So, like, basically no one knows about Euronews. So the media coverage in Europe, if you look at social media, is, well, not. It's hard to get information there. There's a lot of information which you can look at, but it's not sorted very well, or like at all. And it's very hard to find the information you're looking for. So my question for you is, you should support journalism against this propaganda. Why aren't you looking at yourself and about the information given by the European Parliament before you try to make the propaganda smaller. So the debate about the Euronews was just initiated. I think that Russia propaganda should be criticized independently of what we are talking about with Euronews. So if you look at this massive propaganda activity, and like most people don't even look at this, please raise your hand if you listen to this Russian propaganda media. Well, there's no one, yeah. So even though no one is listening to them, it has its effect. It doesn't have its effect on the people sitting in this room, but it has an effect. But back to Euronews. So when people started Euronews, when it was invented, the European Union was a lot smaller, and we had the idea that there should be a European public, and the European public is very segmented, and the idea was to have a public television service for European news reporting about the European culture and European politics. This didn't really work well, for example, because Germany decided not to work with us, but did have Deutsche Welle and Phoenix, which are German TV channels. So now we have a weird mix of some money from the public fund and some private funds. So it's a mix which doesn't come up with, doesn't help with the idea we had in the beginning or the demands we have today. And yeah, we just started a talk about how we can improve on this in the different commissions of the European Parliament. This is not a response to the Russian propaganda, but it's more a response to look at the European public, and we should improve on having this kind of news. I find it remarkable that we are discussing two totally different topics. I can't remember so much opposition to one law. There is opposition by the CCC and by the Amadeo Antonio Foundation. So why do you think all of these NGOs are wrong and you are right? Well, this opposition
we are talking with the opposition. There was a Alliance for Freedom of Speech that we talked to, but we know that institutions that you are talking about, what other worries they have. Fortunately, they do not make brash allegations such as censorship, but they talk about overblocking. Those that know the topic talk about self-censorship maybe. But the things, the people you talked about from civil society organizations, from digital world, there are definitely some that support our suggestion. You have to talk to these yourself. But there was another panel where we talked with Digital Courage, where we talked with Peter Schaar, and they didn't exactly support what, for example, Herr Tripp said from Digital Society, Digitale Gesellschaft said, talk to the various parties which have their own network organizations. If I talk with my coalition partner and I have three positions from you cannot do anything there, let's do a round table. That's what we did for the last 2 years, other than having talks, and up to we have to do so much more, forbid this, obligation to oppose or publish distracting statement. The alternatives that have been put have put forward, they've disturbed me. One of those was just, let's have a round table, which doesn't really convince me. Let's have no more right to remove content, which is difficult. We cannot prohibit someone from deleting something. So remove all obligation to removal, and let's do the justice system deal. Let's have the justice system deal with that. But how should we establish a judicial system that can react 24/7 at short notice? How many hundreds or thousands of judges should a single court employ? You can easily attack this by increasing further the amount of content. As an operator, that you can influence this. But as the legal system, you can't. If you earn your money with transporting news, you do have an obligation to not transport obviously criminal content. We didn't have to debate that a call for a murder has to be handed to a judge, and the judge has to go through the whole process of working out a full legal analysis and another authority checking whether the order has been actually executed. I don't think that's practical. We have the question in the middle, but I have a question I would like to add after what you've just said. One criticism of the draft is that with it, in case of doubt, you will achieve removal of this content, but you will not achieve pursuing those that actually publish this content, because you don't oblige anyone to report to the legal authorities about the user that actually publishes. And you've said yourself that you have great difficulty of imagining a justice system that pursues all this if we just talk about removal. But I know that's something different. But you know where I want to get to, the potential criminals being pursued. That is quite an effort. And the criticism is that the law, just as the net blocking law in 2009 tries to make providers act on criminal false news and hate speech, remove it from the net, but not call on or take those to account that publish it, and in this way you cannot pursue them. Well, if you do the one thing, you don't necessarily refrain from doing the other. Maybe you've deleted something where you think whether you should pursue the individual person. There was one report I've heard about, and the response was this complies to the community standards. This was the video of a house being demolished by explosion, and saying we'll have to do this with the German parliament when there are all the people inside it. Now, with a bit of research, I found the phone number of that person and asked that person if he would be happy if I was murdered. And the response I got was, well, no, this wasn't about the members of parliament and the government. It's about the people at the doors. And he retracted basically that he wanted to murder anyone. And I asked this person to publish another statement retracting what he said earlier. And the idea was never to pursue this person criminally. There were people that talked about this, and this statement got a lot of response, and the whole thing escalated. But I want to say, I said that I want a stronger system. So if we pursue those that publish, we have to store the removed content. It could actually be actively handed over by the operators. Now, if we have a person to contact, we have better ways of achieving something if it was anonymous. But if we pursue criminally, we still have not covered everything that we have to do as a society to reduce this kind of hate criminality and reach another kind of dialogue. So in addition to that, there have to be much more initiatives, for example, to hugely increase political education funding.
There's one last question at the end of the hall. Well, maybe another question? Okay, so we have two more questions. Hello. My name is Michael. I had a look at this draft, and I'm reading a very interesting part of it. The companies should save the reported posts for 10 weeks. Is this correct? In my memory, yes, but I don't have the text in front of me. So this is referring to the law for data retention. So if you look at this law for data retention, which is about metadata, and this is about the content, not the metadata. So, okay, so the answer first. To have like a judge, like a criminal.
Of course, you do need the content if you want to pursue. And if someone was using the system anonymously, you also need the metadata to try and find the person that published it. And that's why there is a reference to the data retention law or minimum storage law. Okay, I have another short question to Mr. Kelber. You said, quite interestingly, a small detail that all the networks, social networks, are to be included that are above 2 million domestic users. And my question is, the variable of user number is quite volatile. It can fluctuate a lot. And my question is, how can you verify which social network at what time is above this limit or under it? Of course, you can have people, you can have more than 2 million one day and less than 2 million the other. And why 2 million in the first place? Why this number? And who is supposed to verify that or evaluate that? Well, okay, this is not derived from any natural law, of course. It's a political number. To say that there is a certain relevance to opinion forming here, we want any new companies that may come into existence and have rapid growth. We don't want to have them too quickly needing to install this reporting system. I can imagine that we also have deadlines, transition periods where we don't say the law is now immediately in force. So even those above 2 million that reach a number above 2 million may not have to immediately install the system on the day that the 2 millionth user signs up. But if this is debated in the end, it will have to be the courts that determine this through numbers that have been quoted to investors, for example. Or there are different ways of evaluating whether domestic users, this is what we're talking about in the domestic sphere, these big ones that we talk about are quite open to their investors about this. Okay, it's 6:15. We'll have to finish on time. I'm happy that we had enough space for questions. You realize there's a lot to talk about still, but mostly the interesting thing is, should this law come into force? This is what it looks like. Then we would have a case where we could verify whether it's successful, so that at another time we could talk about whether the European Union should take this as a role model. Thank you to Rebecca Harms and Mr. Kelber. And right, we'll have a nice evening at Republic.